So what's Diddy like?
Sam Bankman-Fried, Diddy's cellmate, just revealed what the rapper's really been doing behind bars, and it's not what you'd expect. Word is, Diddy's acting like he runs the place. Inmates are reportedly fighting over who gets to make his bed.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. They also saying that Diddy, he got inmates in jail making his bed. You heard about that?
Diddy's been up to a lot behind bars. Let me break it down. The high-profile inmates and their shared living situation. Before we dive into this wild situation, we gotta acknowledge what brought these two high-profile figures to the same block. Diddy has been locked down at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn since September 2024, facing major charges including racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The feds have been building a case against him for allegedly using his industry power and influence to exploit and abuse others over decades. Meanwhile, Sam Bankman-Fried, once the wonder kid of crypto who was flexing with billions, caught his own case after his company FTX collapsed, leaving investors and customers in the hole for billions. The former crypto mogul got hit with a 25-year bid on fraud and conspiracy charges, a dramatic fall from grace for someone who was once hailed as one of the most promising young entrepreneurs in America. What makes this situation particularly intriguing is that these two men, who come from completely different worlds, hip-hop and cryptocurrency, now share dormitory-style accommodations in the same unit at MDC Brooklyn. This unusual pairing has naturally got people wondering about their interactions and day-to-day life on the inside. In a rare glimpse behind the wall, Bankman-Fried recently chopped it up with Tucker Carlson, giving insights into his experience at MDC Brooklyn and, most importantly, his interactions with Diddy. This interview offers perhaps the most direct account we have of what Diddy is like in jail, coming from someone who sees him every day in this controlled environment. When asked about his relationship with Diddy during the interview, Bankman-Fried kept it real but revealing.
And I don't know, he's been kind. I've made some friends. It's a weird environment.
This simple statement, "he's been kind," offers a perspective on Diddy that hits different from the public allegations against him. Bankman-Fried gave more details when pressed about what Diddy is like on the inside.
And, he's been kind to people in the unit. He's been kind to me. It's a position no one wants to be in.
This description of Diddy as kind to both Bankman-Fried and others in their unit humanizes a figure who's been largely demonized in the media since his arrest. It suggests that whatever the truth of the allegations, Diddy has maintained a certain level of respect in his interactions with fellow inmates. The living conditions at MDC Brooklyn paint a grim picture of the daily reality these two former ballers now face. The facility is notorious for its terrible conditions, with reports highlighting problems like mold, vermin, extended lockdowns, and understaffing. These conditions create what Bankman-Fried described as a soul-crushing environment.
It's sort of a combination of a few other high-profile cases and then a lot of, ex-gangsters or sort of, alleged ex-gangsters.
Yes, definitely alleged. So what's Diddy like?
Obviously I've only seen one piece of him, which is, Diddy in prison.
This statement reveals something important about who's in their unit. It's not just Diddy and Bankman-Fried, but a mix of high-profile cases and individuals with alleged gang ties. This diverse grouping creates a unique social dynamic, one in which Diddy's fame and rep precede him, yet he must navigate this new hierarchy without all the trappings of wealth and power he once commanded. The physical space they share is a dormitory-style unit designed for approximately 20 male inmates. Diddy is housed in 4 North, a specific area within MDC Brooklyn designated for high-profile inmates or those requiring special protection. This setting forces a level of communal living that's worlds apart from the luxury and privacy both men enjoyed on the outside. Their daily routine is heavily structured, with mandated check-ins, communal bathing, and shared meals. Recreational activities are limited to a gym with basic equipment like yoga mats and a small basketball hoop, along with communal spaces featuring ping-pong tables and televisions. These limited diversions take on major importance in an environment where time drags and meaningful occupation is scarce. Bankman-Fried provided insight into this aspect of prison life as well.
I read books. I've, started reading novels again. I play some chess, and I work on my legal case to the extent I can.
The chess reference is particularly interesting, as Bankman-Fried later reveals that he plays with other inmates, including those with backgrounds very different from his own.
They're good at chess. That's one thing I learned. Former armed robbers who don't speak English, and probably didn't graduate middle school, are a surprising number of them are fairly good at chess. I'm not saying they're grandmasters, but I lose games to them all the time. I was not expecting that.
Wow.
While Bankman-Fried doesn't specifically mention whether Diddy plays chess, this glimpse into the social activities of the unit helps us understand how inmates interact and find common ground, despite their vastly different backgrounds. The financial restrictions of prison life present another stark contrast to their former existences. Inmates are limited to spending $180 every 2 weeks on commissary items, with $1 cans of mackerel, max, often serving as the prison currency. For Diddy, who was once estimated to be worth close to $1 billion, this represents an extraordinary reduction in financial capacity. Communication with the outside world is severely restricted for both men. Phone calls are limited to 15 minutes and are monitored by authorities, while visitor access is confined to specific days, typically Tuesdays. The absence of internet access and digital communication tools further isolates them from the rapidly changing world outside. These conditions have reportedly had visible effects on Diddy's appearance. Without access to hair dye, his hair and beard have turned gray, a physical manifestation of the toll incarceration has taken. This transformation from the meticulously groomed music mogul to a graying inmate symbolizes his fall from grace and the harsh realities of prison life. Beyond these basic living conditions, there have been more sensational claims about Diddy's life behind bars. Reports have emerged suggesting that inmates in Diddy's unit are allegedly fighting to make his bed and perform other personal tasks for him, driven by his celebrity status. Journalist Toure cited an anonymous source claiming there are groupies among the inmates who want to do special things for Diddy, including making his bed, leading to jealousy among those competing for these opportunities. These reports were echoed across multiple outlets, including Sportskeeda, which claimed inmates are fighting for the opportunity to make his bed. Face Africa quoted a former inmate describing Diddy's unit as having groupies who get jealous over who gets to make his bed. However, it's important to note that these claims remain unverified, with no direct evidence or official confirmation. They are based largely on secondhand accounts and have not been addressed in court documents related to Diddy's case. What Bankman-Fried's interview does confirm is that Diddy has a certain level of social standing within the unit, consistent with his public persona as someone who can charm and influence those around him. The description of him as kind suggests he has adapted to prison life in a way that has won him some measure of respect from fellow inmates. The dynamic between Diddy and Bankman-Fried themselves is particularly fascinating. These are two men who, prior to their respective downfalls, operated at the top of very different games. Diddy built his empire in music and entertainment over decades, becoming a cultural icon and influencer. Bankman-Fried's rise was meteoric by comparison, quickly ascending to prominence in the cryptocurrency world before an equally rapid collapse. Now, stripped of their wealth, power, and freedom, they find themselves equals in the most basic sense, two men confined to the same space, subject to the same rules and restrictions, and facing uncertain futures as their legal battles continue. This leveling effect of incarceration creates a unique context for their interaction, one in which past achievements and status mean little compared to how one conducts oneself day to day. The fact that Bankman-Fried describes Diddy as kind in this context is telling. It suggests that whatever his past actions and whatever the truth of the allegations against him, Diddy has found a way to navigate prison life with a certain grace and humanity. This stands in contrast to the image painted by prosecutors of a predatory figure who abused his power and influence. As we continue to explore the revelations about Diddy's life in the pen, it's important to remember that these glimpses come to us through intermediaries. In this case, primarily through the lens of Sam Bankman-Fried's experience. The full reality of Diddy's daily existence in MDC Brooklyn likely contains nuances and complexities that escape even these first-hand accounts. Inmate dynamics and the alleged special treatment. The relationship between power and privilege doesn't just disappear when the cell doors slam shut. It transforms, taking on new forms shaped by the unique social ecosystem of the joint. In the case of Sean Diddy Combs, his transition from music mogul to federal inmate presents a fascinating case study in how celebrity status operates within the confined world of a detention center. According to various reports, Diddy appears to have established a special position within the social hierarchy of MDC Brooklyn. Beyond the basic kindness described by Bankman-Fried, there are suggestions of a more complex dynamic at play, one in which Diddy's celebrity status affords him certain privileges and considerations from fellow inmates. The most striking of these claims centers around inmates allegedly competing to perform personal services for Diddy. Journalist Tour reported that inmates in Diddy's unit are fighting for the opportunity to make his bed, citing an anonymous source and reporter Lisa Evers, who spoke with a former MDC inmate. This claim paints a picture of Diddy as someone who, even in prison, commands a level of attention and deference that sets him apart from other inmates. The report suggests that there are groupies among the inmates who are eager to do special things for Diddy, creating a situation where jealousy arises among those competing for these opportunities. Face 2, Face Africa quoted a former inmate describing how inmates in Diddy's unit react with jealousy over who gets to make his bed, suggesting a level of competition for Diddy's favor among fellow prisoners. While these claims are difficult to verify and remain allegations rather than confirmed facts, they align with broader patterns observed in prisons where celebrities or high-profile inmates often receive special treatment from both staff and fellow prisoners. The nature of this treatment can range from small courtesies to more substantial privileges that make the harsh conditions of incarceration somewhat more bearable. Beyond these personal services, there are other ways in which Diddy's status reportedly influences his prison experience. Reports indicate that Diddy interacts with inmates by buying their phone time, having his team put money into their commissary accounts. This practice, while seemingly benign, has caught the attention of prosecutors who claim he used it to influence public perception and potentially the jury pool. The ability to effectively purchase additional phone time through other inmates represents a significant advantage in an environment where communication with the outside world is strictly limited. It suggests that Diddy has found ways to leverage his remaining resources. In this case, the ability to have money deposited into commissary accounts to secure benefits that would otherwise be unavailable to him. This pattern of using resources to gain advantages extends to other aspects of Diddy's incarceration as well. Prosecutors have alleged that Diddy has been using the phone accounts belonging to other inmates, potentially as a way to avoid having his calls monitored. They claim he has used the accounts of at least 8 other inmates to make unauthorized three-way calls and send hundreds of texts, some of which allegedly went to people on Diddy's no-contact list. These allegations suggest a level of manipulation that goes beyond simply receiving special treatment from admiring fellow inmates. If true, they indicate that Diddy has actively worked to circumvent the restrictions placed on him, using his influence over other inmates to maintain a level of communication and control that would otherwise be impossible within the confines of MDC Brooklyn. The question of why other inmates would be willing to provide these services, whether making Diddy's bed or allowing him to use their phone accounts, is complex. Former Metropolitan Detention Center Deputy Warden Dr. D. Wayne Hendricks offered some insight into this dynamic when asked about inmates making Diddy's bed. Yeah, that's not necessarily uncommon, especially for someone of his celebrity status, especially if he's being housed with individuals that aren't a threat to him or he's not a threat to them. So I'm assuming they probably are maybe doing some favors for him, maybe even cooking food in the microwave. Now, they are to have hot water at a certain temperature where they can cook certain processed foods that they buy in, and they're also charged with having ice machines. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're probably not cooking for him as well as doing other favors, maybe even washing his clothes. So that's not a surprise. When asked why inmates would be willing to serve Diddy in this way, Hendricks kept it 100. Well, I think maybe for some, some folks are just, you have a different makeup of individuals that are behind bars. And some of them he may have idolized his music throughout the years. And some may think at some point maybe he'll do them a favor or solid or make some contacts for them, at some point, during their stay at the detention center. So I'm not surprised by that because I've also seen other high-profile inmates, not necessarily someone as famous as Mr. Combs, but some people with what we call street credibility, whose name is pretty popular in the streets in different communities across the country. And folks would want to just be around that type of energy. So I'm not surprised by that at all. This perspective highlights several motivations that might drive inmates to seek favor with someone like Diddy. There's the simple fact of his celebrity, the chance to associate with someone famous, even in these reduced circumstances. There's also the possibility of future benefits, the hope that Diddy might be able to help them in some way, either during their incarceration or after their release. And there's the more intangible desire to be close to someone with street credibility or cultural significance, to feel connected to something beyond the confining walls of the detention center. Bankman-Fried's interview offers additional insights into how inmates view their high-profile peers. When asked how other inmates react to having 2 famous prisoners in their unit, he observed,
Well, it's a really interesting question. And if, of course, some of them are, I think are thinking like, wow, this is sort of a big opportunity, to meet people they wouldn't otherwise get to meet, which is, it shocked me the first time I heard that. Right? It makes sense.
Yeah.
This observation aligns with Hendrix's assessment. For some inmates, the presence of famous figures like Diddy and Bankman-Fried represents an unexpected opportunity, a chance encounter that takes on outsized significance in an environment where novel experiences are few and far between. What's particularly interesting about these dynamics is how they represent both a continuation and a transformation of the power structures that existed in Diddy's pre-incarceration life. As a music mogul and cultural influencer, Diddy was accustomed to being surrounded by people eager to please him, to gain his favor, and to be associated with his success. In prison, this dynamic persists, but in altered form. Instead of assistants, employees, and industry figures seeking his approval, it's fellow inmates looking for recognition, benefits, or simply the reflected glow of his fame. Yet this continued influence comes with significant limitations. Despite whatever special treatment he may receive from fellow inmates, Diddy remains subject to the fundamental restrictions of prison life. His movements are controlled, his communications monitored, his privacy virtually non-existent. Whatever power he wields within the unit is circumscribed by the larger power of the institution itself. This tension between continued privilege and inescapable constraint creates a paradoxical situation, one in which Diddy simultaneously enjoys advantages relative to other inmates, while experiencing a dramatic loss of freedom and control compared to his previous life. It's a microcosm of how power operates in confined spaces, where small differences in status and treatment take on outsized importance precisely because the overall environment is so restricted. The allegations about inmates making Diddy's bed and performing other services for him take on additional significance when viewed in the context of the charges against him. Prosecutors have alleged that Diddy ran what they describe as a criminal enterprise involving the exploitation of others, including claims of coerced sexual acts and other forms of abuse. The image of inmates competing to serve him in prison creates an uncomfortable parallel with these allegations, suggesting a pattern of Diddy positioning himself at the center of a social hierarchy where others cater to his needs and desires. Of course, the key distinction is consent. Whatever services inmates may provide to Diddy in prison are presumably voluntary, motivated by the factors Hendrix and Bankman-Fried described rather than by force or coercion. Yet the pattern of Diddy establishing himself in a position where others serve him, even in this radically different context, is noteworthy. Sam Bankman-Fried's description of Diddy as kind adds another layer to this complex picture. It suggests that whatever special treatment Diddy may receive, he navigates these relationships with a level of grace and consideration that has earned him positive regard from at least some of his fellow inmates. This kindness, if genuine, complicates the narrative of Diddy as someone who simply exploits his status for personal advantage. The full reality of Diddy's prison relationships likely involves this kind of complexity, moments of genuine human connection alongside instances where status and influence are leveraged for practical benefits. The close quarters and limited options of prison life tend to strip away pretense, revealing aspects of character that might be obscured in the outside world where wealth and power can create greater distance between individuals. Bankman-Fried's observations about prison life more generally help to contextualize these dynamics. He describes prison as a soul-crushing environment where the most trivial things become all that people have left to care about.
But, no one wants to be in prison. And you can imagine what happens when you take sort of 40 people, all of whom have been at least charged with crimes, and lock them in a single room for years on end and throw out the key, which is the most trivial things become all that people have left to care about.
In such an environment, the opportunity to make a celebrity's bed might indeed take on an importance that seems disproportionate from the outside. It becomes not just a task, but a marker of status within the unit, a way of distinguishing oneself in a place where distinctions are few and meaningful activities are scarce. Bankman-Fried elaborates on this point later in the interview.
But the lack of other meaningful things to spend my time on is one of the most kind of soul-crushing things about prison.
This insight helps explain why seemingly small favors and interactions might become the focus of competition and jealousy among inmates. When meaningful activities and opportunities are severely limited, the chance to interact with a famous figure like Diddy, to make his bed, to prepare food for him, to be acknowledged by him, takes on an exaggerated significance. The picture that emerges is one of a prison microcosm where Diddy occupies a position of relative privilege, receiving special consideration from fellow inmates while navigating the same fundamental restrictions as everyone else. Whether Whether this special treatment extends to the specific claims about bed making and other personal services remains unclear, but the broader pattern of Diddy leveraging his status for whatever advantages are available seems consistent with both Bankman-Fried's observations and the allegations by prosecutors. As Diddy's trial approaches, with jury selection underway as of May 2025, these dynamics may shift. The outcome of the trial will determine not just his legal fate, but potentially his standing within the prison community as well. A conviction could cement his status as a long-term inmate, altering how both he and others perceive his position. An acquittal would remove him from this environment entirely, ending this unusual chapter in his life. For now, the reports of inmates competing to make Diddy's bed and perform other services for him remain allegations, unverified claims that nonetheless offer a glimpse into the complex social world of prison life and how celebrity status operates within those confines. Whether true in their specifics or not, they point to the broader reality that even in prison, where the trappings of wealth and fame are stripped away, the echoes of status and influence persist, shaping relationships and experiences in ways both subtle and profound. Legal battles, future prospects, and life after the bid. The walls of MDC Brooklyn contain not just the physical bodies of Sean Diddy Combs and Sam Bankman-Fried, but also their ongoing legal battles, complex proceedings that will ultimately determine how many more days, months, or years they will spend behind those walls. For both men, the courts represent both their greatest challenge and their only legitimate hope for freedom. Diddy's legal situation is particularly precarious. He faces serious federal charges, including racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. These charges stem from allegations that he orchestrated what prosecutors describe as freak-offs, allegedly drug-fueled sexual performances that lasted days, with victims given controlled substances and receiving IV fluids afterward. The evidence against him includes materials seized during raids on his Miami and Los Angeles homes in March 2024, which reportedly uncovered over 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant, supporting claims about these freak-offs. The seriousness of these charges is reflected in the potential penalties. If convicted on the racketeering charge, Diddy faces up to life in prison, with a minimum of 15 years for sex trafficking. Despite the gravity of these charges, Diddy has maintained his innocence, pleading not guilty and mounting a vigorous legal defense. His attorneys have described the alleged freak-offs as consensual, arguing, "Is it sex trafficking? Not if everybody wants to be there," and have consistently characterized the charges as overreach by prosecutors. His legal team has also focused on procedural challenges, such as arguing that a cell search violated his attorney-client privilege. This motion partially succeeded, with a judge ordering prosecutors to discard copies of seized notes. These efforts reflect a strategy of challenging the prosecution's methods and evidence, rather than directly addressing the substance of the allegations. Multiple attempts to secure bail have been rejected, with judges citing Diddy as a serious flight risk and expressing concerns about witness tampering. This continued detention has placed him in the unusual position of preparing for a high-stakes trial while navigating the challenges of prison life. The trial itself is scheduled to begin in May 2025, with jury selection currently underway. Reports indicate that 4 alleged victims, including his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura, will testify under their real names. The prosecution's witness list is expected to grow as the trial approaches, potentially including additional accusers and witnesses to the alleged criminal enterprise. The outcome of this trial will determine not just Diddy's legal fate, but the remainder of his life. At 55 years old, as of 2025, a lengthy prison sentence would mean he might spend the rest of his productive years behind bars. Even with potential reductions for good behavior or other factors, the prospect of decades in prison looms large over his future. Sam Bankman-Fried's situation, while similarly serious, has already progressed further through the legal system. Having been convicted and sentenced to 25 years, his focus now is on appeal rather than trial preparation. When asked about his potential release date during his interview with Tucker Carlson, he painted a grim picture.
It's a complicated calculation, which I don't understand all the details of because of like first step back stuff. And if you just add, my prison sentence, my age, so to speak, then the answer is in my late 40s.
Wow. Could you handle that?
Sorry, what I said was wrong. I misspoke. If you add my prison sentence, my age, to the late 50s. If you include all of the possible decreases, it might be the late 40s. But the raw answer is, it's 32 when I was convicted, and I got a 25-year sentence.
This stark assessment, that he might be in his late 40s or even his late 50s before regaining freedom, highlights the extraordinary consequences both men face for their alleged crimes. These are not short-term interruptions to their lives, but potentially transformative periods that could consume decades of their remaining years. For both Diddy and Bankman-Fried, the prospect of aging in prison presents unique challenges. Bankman-Fried referenced studies suggesting that you age at roughly 3 times the normal rate in prison, implying that their physical and mental health might deteriorate more rapidly than they would outside. This accelerated aging, combined with the limited healthcare available in correctional facilities, presents a sobering reality for both men. Beyond the physical toll, there's the psychological impact of long-term incarceration to consider. Bankman-Fried described this aspect of prison life eloquently.
I prefer having the digital world. That, you know, at the end of the day, like it's, but I will say that when I say that, it's less from a perspective of like enjoyment or you know, pleasure or leisure, and it's more from a perspective of productivity and ability to have impact in the world. You know, from that perspective, it's so hard to do anything when you don't have the digital world.
This sense of disconnection from the world, of being unable to have meaningful impact or productivity, is particularly significant for 2 men who previously wielded enormous influence in their respective fields. The contrast between their former lives, characterized by constant connection, significant responsibility, and global impact, and their current state of isolation and restriction is stark. Bankman-Fried elaborated on this feeling of disconnection when asked if he was concerned about emerging into a world transformed by technologies like artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I feel it pretty acutely. And it's, you know, this sort of feeling of the world moving on without you.
This poignant acknowledgement captures a central tragedy of long-term incarceration, the sense that life continues without you, that the world evolves and changes while you remain static, confined not just in space but in time. For someone like Diddy, whose career has been defined by staying ahead of cultural trends and shaping the zeitgeist, this feeling of being left behind may be particularly acute. Their respective legal strategies reflect different stages of the justice process. Diddy's team continues to fight for his freedom through pre-trial motions, challenges to evidence, and preparations for his defense at trial. Meanwhile, Bankman-Fried, having exhausted his options at the trial level, focuses on appeal, a process that typically has lower success rates but represents his best remaining hope for reducing his sentence. The different nature of their alleged crimes also shapes their legal prospects. Bankman-Fried's case, while involving enormous sums of money, was primarily financial in nature: fraud, money laundering, and similar charges related to the collapse of FTX. Diddy's charges involve allegations of physical and sexual abuse, trafficking, and exploitation of individuals. These distinctions may affect how judges and juries perceive their cases, as well as the public sympathy or condemnation they receive. Public perception plays a significant role in high-profile cases like these. Both men have experienced dramatic falls from grace, with their public images transformed from success stories to cautionary tales. For Diddy in particular, the allegations have tarnished a career spanning decades, calling into question his legacy in the music industry and his broader cultural impact. That brings us to the end of this video. For more interesting videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.